Hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar regarding the PIM implementation process for customers. My name is Jonas and I'm a PIM consultant here at Dynamicweb. So through the past 6 months, we have been working on defining a PIM implementation framework with the purpose of, you can say, helping ourselves as well as our partners in facilitating a successful PIM implementation. So I'm of course pleased to see that we have quite some attendees here today. The plan for this presentation is that I will be presenting for approximately 40 minutes, and then we will have a little time left for some questions afterwards. So let's just jump into it. Here we go. So I have divided the presentation into 2 phases. You can say a sales phase and an implementation phase. So said in another way, it is divided into what comes before the contract is signed and what comes after the contract is signed, where we actually need to go in and implement a proper PIM solution. So in the sales phase, I will be focusing on a tool that is used as an input to the time estimation of PIM projects. And in the second step, I'll be focusing on the actual PIM implementation, the process, as well as the supporting document that has been created as being a part of this process. So first step, selling PIM. So imagine that you are in the middle of a sales phase. There has been some pre-sales, there has been various workshops and meetings. And at some point in this process, a crucial question will be asked, namely, how much will a PIM implementation cost? And to help out with this very difficult task, we have developed a tool here in Dynamicweb with the aim of uncovering how complex a given project is expected to become. So said in a more simple way, how many hours do we expect to use on this PIM implementation? So first of all, let's take a look at what this tool, which is an Excel sheet, what it is and what it isn't. So some assumptions regarding this tool. So the hour estimate is solely related to the hours spent on the PIM implementation. So that means not the time spent on the integration, not on project management or e-commerce configurations and other things. So all of these are scoped outside of that tool. Put in another way, you can say that everything that goes into the PIM system, the integration, and everything that goes out, so feeds and channels and additional channels other than our own Rapido channel, will not be part of the hours estimated in this tool. Then additionally, the configuration includes only the default language. So it's the job of the customer to make translation to other relevant languages. And it's also their job to enrich the products within the PIM and, if needed, clean up data throughout the whole process. And lastly, it is an estimate. So it's of course based on subjective assumptions and experiences that we have had here in Dynamicweb. And as you can see in some of the next slides, there are some elements that has an influence on how much time we spend on a PIM project. So let's try to jump into that. See, my PowerPoint is a bit slow. So let's have a look at the included drivers that are part of this time estimation tool. So first of all, product attributes. So a product attribute is a characteristic of a product that needs to be in a field of its own, you can say. So let's try to have a look at a specific example of this. So we'll look into the back end on the front end here, where we go in and see, let's just take the mountain bikes and choose one of these products. And here you can see we have an image, we have a description, here we have some details. So each of these would be regarded as a product attribute, a field of its own where you can enrich specific data. These would be, what can you say, attributes relevant for bikes in regards to the equipment that they have. So in theory, all attributes could be part of the product description. However, in reality, this rarely is the case. And one of the main reasons for this is that having specific fields or attributes means that you will also be able to have more control and structure in the enrichment of your products. So allow me to elaborate on this. If we try to jump to the backend, where we have a workflow set up here. So I'll just take a look at the product that we just saw in the front end, which is this one. So let's assume that we are in the middle of enriching this specific product within the PIM system. So here you can see that I entered into ready for technical details. So a workflow step relevant for the bike that we just looked at. And what we can see here is an overview of how finished these products are in relation to the attribute that is expected to be enriched on them. So in this example, the attributes relevant for the bikes has been defined. And based on that, you can see that we get a completion rule over here. So in regards to the attribute that is expected to be enriched on these, on the Danish as well as the English language, we are 82% done in regards to basically being able to publish this product into, for example, the e-commerce channel. So in conclusion, you can say that product attributes can provide you with structure and control. And then what we're looking at here in the Excel tool is basically the total number of product attributes across the entire product portfolio. And this is a very, very crucial factor in, what can you say, estimating how complex a project, PIM project implementation is going to be. Let's jump back to the PowerPoint. Next one we have is product SKU. So how many products should be maintained in PIM? It's as simple as that, so no need for further elaboration on this. And then we have product main groups and subgroups, and how many of these do the customer have? So generally speaking, you can say that a product main group is a higher level product group that then would contain more specific subgroup that we are then referring to as subgroups, which would then contain the products that we have. So if we would go back to the front end, the web page that we just looked at before, where we saw the bike, you can see that in this example, the bikes would be a very good example of a main group, whereas mountain bikes, road bikes, hybrid bikes, coasting bikes, and cruiser bikes would be perfect examples of subgroups. And I'm aware that it's not always as simple as this in real life, but that's the main logic behind it, you can say. Then we have variant attributes. So how many variant attributes does the customer have? And then you might ask, well, what is a variant attribute and why is it not just regarded as the same as a product attribute? So if we start looking at what is a variant attribute, variant attributes can simply be seen as a characteristic that differentiate one variant from another variant. So once again, I would like to show you an example of this, just to be very specific. For example, this t-shirt that we have right here is available in 3 different colors. So this is a variant attribute, and in 3 different sizes, which also is a variant attribute. So why is this not just regarded as a common product attribute? And there is a simple answer for that. Because if a customer has product variants, then the complexity of a PIM project increases a lot, since there are many different ways of handling product variants within Dynamicweb. And there are also several things that we need to be aware of when doing it, both in regards to how we would like to showcase the products, like you see out here in the front end on the web page, but also in regards to how we actually combine them in the back end. And this will just increase the time spent on a PIM project. So if we jump back to the PowerPoint, the last one, which is how many data sources are relevant for the import of products or product attributes to Dynamicweb. And it's clear that several data sources will naturally increase the complexity of the analysis phase within a PIM project. It introduces a higher risk for duplicate products and bad data, and it might also result in several import jobs in order for us to get all the data into Dynamicweb that we would like. So that was the logic behind some of the included drivers, all the included drivers that we have. If we take a look at the excluded drivers, you can say that what's common for them is that they are more qualitative elements. So they can be very hard to, and time consuming not the least, to measure in advance. And first of all, we have the communication efficiency, and this is based on our experiences, you can say. Things like how many individuals you have involved in the project, who will make the decisions, and also potential third-party consultants can cause this communication to become less efficient, you can say. Then we have the workflow complexity, and the internal workflow can be very difficult to foresee before actually being in the middle of a PIM project. And that's the main reason why this isn't included in the drivers. Of course, the customer's level of product knowledge is also a very significant driver, and how well structured the data are. You can see there is a big difference between the time that will be spent on a PIM project where the customer has a great data structure versus one where you have bad or duplicate or redundant data that first needs to be cleaned up before we can actually really get started with the PIM implementation. And then we have response time, naturally. So the resources, you can say, that are made available by the customer will, of course, affect the response time and also the time over which the project will run. And lastly, the customer technological abilities. And basically, you can say, how many tasks are we here at Dynamicweb actually able to involve the customer in, and how efficient will these tasks be handled? So you can say that from a PIM perspective, what would be optimal would be to have one or two highly available contact persons that would have decision-making authority, and more importantly, a good understanding about the product portfolio and also the work processes that are in the organization, the workflows of the company, as well as, what can you say, a deeper understanding of some of the logic behind the data and how it's structured. And I know that these are high expectations, so it's just from a perspective of what would be optimal, this would be it. So let's try to take a look at the tool in real life. So you can see this is how it looks in its simple form. Let me just zoom in a bit. Behind this, we have a lot of, you can say, formulas and logics. But the important thing for the customer to know is basically an understanding of what each and every one of these PIM drivers means, and basically being able to provide us with this information. You can see that if I went into one of these and were to change the number, the total number of hours estimated for the project would naturally change in extension of this, as you can see here. So here we also have the assumptions that I just went through. We have some elaboration on the driver, so similarly to what I just did with you right now in this presentation. So yeah, that's basically it for the tool. Rather simple when you see it in here. So let's jump back to the PowerPoint. We have this slide, which basically aims at generalizing, or you can say simplifying, the tool that I just showed you to try to provide a general idea of what we would normally consider as being a small, medium, and large project. You can see up here in the top column where we have the highlights of small, medium, and large. Within each of these drivers that I just went through, we sat down and basically defined what we would consider as being a medium, small, and a large project in a specific or in the given driver. So a small project is in the range of, you can say, just to generalize, 50 hours, medium projects in the range of 125 hours, and large projects typically go beyond the side of 200 hours in Dynamicweb PIM terms, at least. So hopefully you can say this tool can help us with the very difficult task of estimating the time spent on a PIM project. But it's also very important that we would like to include the customer in, you can say, the deeper understanding of some of the different drivers that are significant in regards to how much time will be spent on a PIM project, and basically create a common understanding for some very important terms. These terms that we have out here under the drivers are very important throughout the whole PIM implementation. So that was it in regards to time estimation of a PIM implementation. So let's jump into the actual process. So now you can say that the contract has been signed, the project is on, and we need to start the PIM implementation. So the overall PIM implementation process looks as follows. There are 5 main steps. Each of these 5 steps contains some sub-steps. And you can say just a brief intro of the implementation. The first thing we do is to obtain a general overview of the project. Then we would enter into an analysis phase. Step 3 would then be related to having an actual PIM workshop with the customer. And after the PIM workshop, we would basically start the PIM configuration or the PIM build. And finally, the customer would go live. I will go somewhat into depth with each of these 5 steps just to give you an idea of how a PIM project in practical terms are being implemented. But more importantly, I will be focusing on the bullet points that you see in the bottom of the different steps, specifically in step 1, 2, and 4, because each of these bullet points are actually referring to the title of a specific supporting document that's relevant for that specific step. So for example, you can see in step 1, we have PIM drivers time estimation, so the Excel sheet that we just had a look at, which has relevance for the first step of the PIM implementation process, which is to obtain a general overview. It's also important to mention that we have supporting documents that are, you can say, relevant for the PIM consultant, and then we have some that are relevant directly for the customer from a customer's perspective. So I'll naturally in this presentation be focusing on the customer relevant supporting documents, and that's why I basically excluded the documents of relevance only for the PIM consultant. So said in another way, you don't have to worry about the supporting documents not being part of this presentation, but just a brief note on what we also have. We have basically various sales notes documentations in regards to our sales phase. Then we have some PowerPoint presentation, which will basically help us through the PIM workshop and also in regards to having a PIM training with the customer. And then a master note document that will be relevant for us throughout the whole PIM project. We'll get back to that later on. So throughout here, I'll basically be focusing on the different steps, diving into them, and then showing you each of these supporting documents that you see as the bullet points down here. So let's just jump into it, the overview. And in this step, it's important to mention that it's not an in-depth step. It's about obtaining a kind of a helicopter overview of some of the most relevant factors in a project seen from a PIM perspective. And it does not include much, if any, contact with the customer. Instead, here, the job of the PIM consultant is to try and retrieve all the PIM relevant data that are currently available within our organization. So in Dynamicweb, for example, all the documentation that has been collected through the pre-sales and the sales phase. Yeah, and that's basically it. So if we dive into step one, so these are the sub-steps for the overview, you would get an idea of which customer we're dealing with, which are the type of products that we're dealing with, how many languages should be part of the solution. You'll look into the integration points and the distribution channels. So which integration sources or sources are we dealing with in this project, and which distribution channels are included in the project. And by distribution channel, I basically mean where do we want to send the product information to? Perhaps a website, could be Amazon, could be a lot of different places. You'll look into the team that's relevant for the specific project. So which stakeholders and relevant contact persons will you be in contact with? And lastly, you can say organizational impact is a bit intangible, but a PIM implementation is a big change for organization, and it's an important fact to be aware of this. So I'll not go into the supporting document because we already looked at that. I'll just jump straightly to step two, which is the analysis phase. So in the analysis phase, clearly we will go a little bit more into depth and start investigating and understand some of the logics within the project. So let's take a look here, and I'll go through the supporting document that we have here called PIM Workshop Pre-Questions once I have explained each of the 4 steps that we have here. So 2A is about collecting data and basically obtaining a deeper understanding of the product portfolio. 2B is about already starting to organize the attributes that we have available, so get an overview of where the attributes are currently being maintained and where they should be maintained in the future. And this is actually a very important point, because once we start projects, we have some customers that are basically using the ERP system somewhat like it was a PIM system. And very early on, it's important to address and question this structure. And it often makes sense to move the maintenance of these attributes from the ERP system and into Dynamicweb PIM. And yeah, generally speaking, you can say that the customer should only have information in the ERP system that they're actually using from an ERP perspective. You could say some of the most general fields that are maintained in an ERP system is information related to the product name, number, stock logic, units logic, price matrices, and so on. Step 2C is in regards to, do we have product data that support using single products? Do we have variants? If so, which variants are dealing with? And lastly, in regards to images and digital assets, so which image quality are we dealing with? Do we have videos? How will we be working with these images? How are the customer currently working with their images? Can it be possible for us to set up what we call an image pattern, which basically is to set up a job that automatically runs out these images to all of our products based on a unique key that would then match the image to the relevant product. So let's try to take a quick look at the supporting document that we have here, which is the PIM workshop pre-questions. So this is one that the customer would see rather early on in the process. So basically it's a list of, you can say, rather simple questions that will be sent out as input for the PIM workshop. We have some formalities that will most likely be filled when the customer receives this document. And then we have a quite important part here, which is, let me just zoom in a little bit, in regards to some of the data that we need to really kickstart the PIM implementation process. And you can see the first one is overview of ERP fields. So it's crucial for us to get a proper understanding of what is available in your ERP system. And basically this cannot be stressed enough. It's very important. So normally what we would do is we would get either a Skype meeting where we can see how the logic is in the ERP system, or even more simple, receive an Excel sheet with columns that would then represent the attributes that are relevant for the products that you have in your ERP system. If customer has other systems where they store product data, then this would of course also be relevant to get an overview of and basically see what we have here. Of course, websites, if customers are utilizing product catalogs, for example, InDesign, then these would of course also have relevance. So basically it's about getting all the data that could be relevant for this project and the PIM implementation. And then you can see we have a list of questions down here, rather simple questions, and these questions will basically act as the foundation for the PIM workshop. That is the next step of the PIM process, going through the workflow, the different languages, something in regards to the videos and images, some general product information, where the product information is located, and lastly something in regards to the channels and integrations that we expect on this solution. So let's jump back to the PowerPoint. So the PIM workshop, we sent out the PIM workshop pre-questions, they answered, we made our analysis, we already obtained an overview. So now we are at a step where we are basically ready to have a PIM workshop with the customer. In some cases, it's basically one whole day sitting down with a meeting with the customer. In other cases, it might be several smaller workshops, depending on basically what matches the project and the customer. So let's try to have a look at this step. So some of the things you would like to go through throughout a PIM workshop is, first of all, to present PIM as a concept. So try to create a presentation and try to create a common understanding so that we are speaking the same languages in some way. Secondly, you would also demo the PIM. So during the workshop, make sure that we have basically a sample of the customer's products within the system, so that we try to emphasize a lot that we, in practice, basically can show in Dynamicweb what we are discussing. So basically allowing you, the customer, to make decision based on an informed basis. Then we would also present the analysis. So throughout the analysis, we would probably have many of questions. We will have some challenges. We will have some potential different ways of solving these challenges and questions. And of course, providing also recommendations and basically just trying to figure out in which direction this project should go. Lastly, the 3D would be where we give each other homework. So make sure that we both know which tasks that we have, each and every one of us, and divide the responsibility going forward. So there's no supporting documents, as you can see in this step, but we of course have a PowerPoint which will be acting as kind of the foundation for this workshop, and then also a complete overview notes document that I have excluded in this presentation. Step 4 of the PIM implementation process. So this is where the real fun starts, you can say. And this is where you actually start configuring and building the PIM solution. So if we jump into it, you can also see that we have two different supporting documents here. We have the PIM configuration and the PIM overview that I'll go into after I explained the different steps. I normally say that approximately 60% of the time spent on a total PIM project would be in this step of the process. And it's also important to mention that in step 4A, the PIM configuration, It's not that I sit down in a basement and just configure for 2 weeks and get back to the customer and then show them everything I made and they accept this PIM configuration and then we go from there. It's a very iterative process, so there's a lot of Skype meeting, a lot of going back and forth and trying to obtain the relevant knowledge. But in this step 4a, some of, you can say, the most relevant things that I'm looking into is basically trying to understand the group structure of the products. I'll be looking into which type of attributes we'll be creating within Dynamic Web, how these attributes will behave on the solution, you can say, look into the variant attributes that we discussed early on, dashboards, workflows, set up some completion rules that matches these workflows, perhaps look into notification emails and users. Perhaps there should be specific permissions on the solution. And don't worry, you'll become you can say increasingly familiar with all of these things as a project progresses. 4b, sorry, that was a mistake. So present the PIM configuration. Often this is done on an ongoing basis. And then 4C, which is the PIM training. So at some point the solution is so mature that a PIM training is suitable. And in this PIM training, the customer is then basically educated in how to utilize Dynamic Web setup. And it's very important to be specific here so that they know exactly how they should be working with their own product enrichment. So it's of course very specific to their solution and the PIM setup made for them. And throughout this process, they have been involved in a lot of things, so it's not completely new for them when we get to the PIM training. That's at least the idea. Last step, which is after the PIM training. So here the goal is that the customer is more or less self-reliant, you can say, enough to finish the PIM implementation on their own, and of course with some kind of ongoing support from the relevant PIM consultant. So let's try to look at the supporting documents that we have for this step. If we start with the PIM configuration. So this supporting document is basically the foundation of the whole PIM solution, you can say. We do a couple of things in here. You can see that we have some different sheets down here. The first product structure is basically related to the groups of products that you have and how you perceive your groups of products. So just to give you a practical example, here we have a sports shop selling bandages. They are selling some more specific bandages, ankle bandages and knee bandages, and t-shirts and bike helmets. So in Dynamic Web terms, what this would mean, or what we use this for, is basically for creating, you can say I created a warehouse here called Sports Shop, where you can see that we have a similar structure to the one that I just showed you. So it's kind of the grouping structure of the different products you have that we will look into here. If we go back to the PowerPoint, oh sorry, not the PowerPoint, the supporting document. So rather simple. Then we have the sheet down here. You can see attribute definition. This is where all the attributes that should be available on the Dynamic Web PIM solution should be defined. So here a customer has a big task of basically defining which attribute would we like to be part of our solution. So what do we expect to have as information on our products? You can see that we have some different columns here. Each and every one of these columns kind of add value, you can say, in regards to the decision of how to make this attribute. So first of all, the name of the attribute, a short description on how this attribute is utilized, an example of what a value in this attribute could be, how you would basically guess that this attribute would be made. Should it be a list box? If yes, then we would of course need some list box options specified in order to make the attribute properly. Should it be a text field? Should it be a number field, so either a decimal or an integer, and so on. And then we have this one, which we already discussed a little bit. So basically in regards to if this attribute is expected to be enriched in the ERP system or in Dynamic Web PIM. It's very important to make this distinction rather early on. Then we have these three, which is basically, you can also call it the data modeling. So we already defined the groups, the main groups and subgroups here in the product structure. So these are all the products on this given project. So now we would like to know exactly where the different attributes have relevance. So you can see this one, all groups, for example. So if we get an X in this one, it would mean that these three attributes are relevant for all products, regardless of where they would be in these main groups and subgroups. Whereas an attribute such as let's just take this one, the protection level of a bandage or a bike helmet would only be relevant for the main group's bandages and bike helmets. And here in this one, you can see that's a bit more specific. The injury indication of an ankle, rather clearly only relevant for ankle bandages. And then we have a couple more over here, which is, you can say, normally we define these a bit later in the process, but it's basically in regards to if this attribute should appear as a filter in the website, and like we discussed earlier on, if it's a variant attribute, so an attribute that separates variants from each other. Then we have one sheet here, which is in regards to, it's very specific, it's in regards to brand information. So if we have a customer that are, what can you say, very keen on brands, and they're working a lot through the brands, and that's the way they understand their products, then it might be that such a setup here in the front end where we have some brand information in a brand tab could have relevance, and that's basically what this sheet is about. The attribute elaboration is basically a short explanation of each of the columns that we have here. So each and every one of them explained shortly. So this is basically the master document of a PIM implementation. It's very, very important document, and it's very often that these are sent out to the customer. I can say I never experienced to get this Excel sheet returned, and then I looked at it and I thought, wow, that was perfect. It's always 3-4 times back and forward, and that's just a normal thing. So this is an ongoing process where we try to define this as good as possible. Let's take a look. We had another supporting document as well. Yeah, the PIM overview. Let me just give you a quick glance into this one. So the PIM overview is basically, I call it a generic quick start or guide to get started with PIM. So basically it's just a customer guide as to some of the most relevant things, some of the most important things that are good to know when starting to enrich these products within Dynamicweb PIM. And you can see we have some different categories of things that I'm explaining a little bit, and everything is with pictures and where you can find it in Dynamicweb, and so on. So a lot of different things here to get started, you can say. And of course, we also have our doc site on Dynamicweb. So just to give you an idea of what the difference of the two of them are, we actually have it here. So on our doc site, we also have information regarding all the different modules that we have on Dynamicweb PIM, the one we're discussing right now. And in here we have, as well as in my notes document that I showed you just before, a lot of information, and this is actually very extensive. So we have many information in here, and what I found is that sometimes it can be an advantage for the customer to just get an overview of the most important things and try to learn these first, and then they can always utilize the doc site afterwards. And if there's something they are in doubt about, they have, well, both my document, the note document, Dynamicweb doc site that we have here with additional information, and of course also the consultant that are responsible for the project is of course also available. Last step, which is that at some point hopefully the customer will go live. So that was the PIM process. Just a quick recap on what we basically went through. You can see in this supporting documents overview that I have right here, I included every supporting document that we have. So throughout this presentation, we have been looking at this one, the drivers for PIM time estimation. So the fourth one, where we go in and evaluate how much time we will be spending on a PIM project. This presentation has been the fifth supporting document, the one that is blued out here, the actual PIM implementation process containing the different steps. Then we have also been looking at the PIM workshop pre-questions that we send out before the actual workshop and expect some answers from the customer. The PIM configuration, the Excel sheet that we just looked at, where we have basically the master of data for the configuration within the PIM. And then lastly, we looked at the last document here in this overview, the PIM overview of a generic quick guide to PIM that can be very easily adapted to match the specific PIM configuration of any customer. And that was basically it. So if you have any questions, don't hesitate. I can see that I was a bit faster than expected. Let me just see. You're welcome to to write questions down in the questions tab. Let me see, we have will they all be available in doc? So the documents, if they're available on the doc side, is that the question that we have here, Lars? All the documents are currently available on Dynamicweb doc site, but as far as I understand, they are available for partners right now. So in regards to customers obtaining all of these, I don't think that's something that we would like to do. I think it would be perhaps the specific ones that I went through here in this presentation. It would make sense to include these to be available for the customer to get. Specifically the PIM configuration. I think that's probably the most important one. If a customer is in a situation where they would like to basically get started before getting started, if it makes sense.